Shalom. As we reach now Psalm 119, let me say that this psalm is the longest by far of all the psalms, and it consists of 176 verses in the acrostic or alphabetical form. As I have mentioned before, the acrostic form in the psalms means that each line begins with a successive letter in the Hebrew alphabet, starting with Aleph, the first letter, and ending with Tav. But unlike some of the other acrostic psalms, this one, each particular letter has its own designated verses, sometimes up to 8 or 9 verses for each letter, hence the length of the psalm. And obviously, because it is so long, I cannot read all of it here. I'm committed to spending 10 minutes or so on each individual psalm, and I plan to do the same for this very long Psalm 119. I will simply read a few excerpts and add a few comments. It begins with the following. Happy are those whose way is blameless, who follow the teaching of the Lord. Happy are those who observe his decrees, who turn to him wholeheartedly. They have done no wrong, but have followed his ways. You have commanded that your precepts be kept diligently. Would that my ways were firm in keeping your laws. Then I would not be ashamed when I regard all your commandments. I will praise you with a sincere heart as I learn your just rules. I will keep your laws. Do not utterly forsake me. And this actually sets the tone for the rest of the verses in this psalm, with an emphasis on the value of following God's decrees and laws. There are several words in Hebrew that are used here to refer to God's guidelines and laws. Edot, or decrees, Torah, or God's teaching, Pikudecha, or Pikudot, or Pikudim, precepts, Chukim, statutes and laws, mitzvot, commandments, and so on. I may have neglected to mention mishpatim, which means rules or judgments. So these words reappear several times in the psalm, with the emphasis on the theme of God providing human beings with a series of laws and teachings and guidelines. Some of them have very clear and discernible reasons behind them. Some of them are more ritualistic in nature, and their reasons may be more elusive, but all of them nevertheless important as far as trying to lead a righteous life and to walk in the way of the Lord. The next set of verses, I just read verse 1 to 8. I'm just going to read 9 to 15. How can a young man keep his way pure? By holding to your word. I have turned to you with all my heart. Do not let me stray from your commandments. In my heart I treasure your promise. Therefore I do not sin against you. Blessed are you, O Lord. Train me in your laws. With my lips I rehearse all the rules you proclaimed. I rejoice over the way of your decrees as over all riches. I study your precepts. I regard your ways. I take delight in your laws. I will not neglect your word. I'm interested in the very first verse. How can a young man, a na'ar, a youth, keep his way pure? By holding to your word. Is the psalmist actually a young man himself, or is he simply reminiscing or remembering what it was like to be young? And we're not really sure of the answer of this. But either way, the reflection here is on a young person's tendency to stray, proclivity towards following the desires of his heart and turning away from the laws of God, because the desires of the flesh, carnal desires, and simply the tendency of young people to, at least some young people, perhaps many, to consider themselves invincible or invulnerable and to take all sorts of risks, and damn the consequences. They're simply going to do what feels good in the moment. The psalmist is remembering that it's particularly hard for a young person to stick to a righteous, godly directed kind of life. And so he says, I have turned to you with all my heart. Do not let me stray from your commandments. In today's day and age, during the pandemic, I just heard a report, as there continues to be an uptick and a surge in certain areas of our country, that in some areas the surge is attributed to or traced to young people, especially people of college age. And with the return of college students to campuses, at least some of them, there have been reports of increased numbers of the virus because some of them can be reckless and attend parties and not wear masks and not keep social distancing, and that makes them more susceptible to the virus. And then if they go home and spend time in their homes or in their communities, then they can pass the virus on to their parents or grandparents or elders, and then it becomes equally concerning, if not more concerning. So it's hard for a young person to keep his way pure. It's hard for young people to really bear down on responsibility and honoring the commitment to caring and being concerned about the welfare of those around them and society. But the psalmist reminds us that especially the young need to be taught and guided by the commandments and statutes of God. We have a verse in verse 105 that I particularly like. Ner leragli devarecha ve'or l'netivati. Your word is a lamp to my feet, a light for my path. I have firmly sworn to keep your just rules. Your word is a lamp to my feet. God's teachings, Torah, mitzvot, and so on, illumine the path for me as I continue to walk the journey of life. The psalmist pledges to do so under the light and direction of God's law. The psalmist reflects in this psalm about all sorts of dangers and evils that pass his way, and even with all of that, he prays and begs for deliverance from God and knows that if he can keep God in mind and keep God's teachings in mind, all will be okay. The psalm ends with the following. May my plea reach you, O Lord. Grant me understanding according to your word. May my petition come before you. Save me in accordance with your promise. My lips shall pour forth praise, for you teach me your laws. My tongue shall declare your promise, for all your commandments are just. Lend your hand to help me, for I have chosen your precepts. I have longed for your deliverance, O Lord. Your teaching is my delight. Let me live that I may praise you. May your rules be my help. I have strayed like a lost sheep. Search for your servant, for I have not neglected your commandments. I have felt, the psalmist says, sometimes that I have neglected God or strayed or gone far from God's path, maybe even neglected the commandments. He asks God to remember him and search for him, for he says he has not neglected your commandments. May feel like a self-contradiction here in what he is saying, but in actuality, this is a wish, and he asks for a wish fulfillment, that he not neglect the commandments. He may have done so in the past, but he doesn't want to do so anymore. He begs to live so that he may praise God, especially during these days that we live in today, with all that is going on around us. The words of the psalmist are a fit reminder to all of us that there is something greater than us and our own individual lives, laws, teachings, guidelines, and values that can give meaning and structure to a life that can feel continuously more chaotic and threatening, with dangers abounding around us. With that awareness, we pledge to do our very best to follow God's ways, to keep those commandments and teachings and laws and statutes as best as we possibly can. That is what will give meaning to our lives and safety to the world around us, as well as peace. Thank you.